English translation. 669th Contact, Part 2. Sunday, the 1st of January 2017, 13:29 hours.
Please excuse me if I interrupt you, because I think that something should be said about the formation of snow crystals. Because I think that many human beings on Earth do not know how snowflakes are actually formed, which is about the same as rain, about which I also wrote once. From the Earth, dust particles are whirled high into the atmosphere, so-called aerosols, which, depending on weather conditions and temperature in the cloud cover, become saturated with water, become heavier than the air, and then fall down to the earth as rain, hail, or snow, depending on the circumstances. If a perfect snowflake is created, it represents a hexagonal prism, which is the simplest form that solid water can take. The snowflake is actually an ice crystal, which is formed because the water molecules take on a hexagonal structure when they crystallize. The fact is that each water molecule has two hydrogen atoms that are slightly positively charged, and one oxygen atom that is slightly negatively charged. The two hydrogen atoms naturally attach themselves to the oxygen atom, resulting in a hexagon or hexagonal shape. Every ice crystal has a hexagonal basic structure, and from this basic hexagonal shape the crystal ideally grows symmetrically. The real ice crystal, however, is not simply a small, flat structure, but rather a highly branched, intricate structure that weighs only about 1 microgram and consists of around 100 trillion water molecules. Although there are about 80 different basic crystal forms in total, which are formed into many more, there are actually no two identical snowflakes. So no two snowflakes are identical, but they all have a hexagonal geometry. It is not possible that snowflakes have only 4 or even 8 arms, because they are all based on the hexagon or hexagon, the very structure in which water crystallizes. A dust particle or aerosol is thus transformed in the cloud, forming a ball of dust and water and thus a raindrop, which also happens when a snow crystal is formed, but the temperature required to form it is much lower than that of a raindrop. I learned from your father Svath that when an aerosol in a cloud is saturated with water, the water freezes to a primal crystal as a result of a low temperature between -10 and -22 degrees Celsius. From this, a hexagonal shape is formed, which is the actual starting point of every snow crystal. These are generally called snowflakes or also snow stars, but they can only form or grow at these low temperatures. The more humid the air or the clouds are, the finer the filigree arms that are formed, whereby the whole ice crystal structure is 6-armed, which is called a dendrite, which in Greek means tree or trees, from dendro. Very seldom are there 12-armed snow crystal cores, but this only occurs when two hexagonal crystals collide and connect with each other.
Schneeflocken die Welt der himmlischen Kristalle, photographed by Kenneth Librecht.
Thanks, and the explanation was probably necessary. Further, I wanted to say, all living beings are also affected by the whole, and consequently also the human beings, in which the human being creates and brings to bear the whole of the artistic through his consciousness and, thus also through his thoughts and imagination, as well as through his actions and artistic creations. With regard to crop circles, this is especially true for certain Earth humans with regard to their artistic impulse vibration receptiveness, if they are sensitive to it. This leads to the special creation of the so-called crop circles, because the cosmic universal artistic impulses give them this ability. Therefore, it has to be said that these crop circles are made by Earth humans. But they are not purely Earth human beings, but effectively an extraterrestrial phenomenon or a cosmic universal size. As far as the light phenomena you mentioned are concerned, I am familiar with two different categories of light, one of which consists of basically invisible ascending but under certain circumstances brightly shining noble gases such as argon, helium, neon, krypton, radon, xenon, and ununoctium. The noble gases, which are constituents of air, have outstanding characteristics with regard to their chemical inertness. Helium itself is formed continuously in the Earth's interior by radioactive decay products of uranium and other radioactive elements, and is therefore also found in some natural gases, in percentage terms depending on the area of the country. Radon, on the other hand, is a product of the radioactive decay of radium, which in turn is the result of the radioactive decay of uranium and thorium. The continuous formation of radon means that it is constantly present in the soil in small quantities and is released from the soil into the air. Another phenomenon of light phenomena is marsh gas, which is produced as a naturally occurring mixture of methane and carbon dioxide, usually in the marshes of swamps by fermentation of plant parts with the participation of bacteria. However, it is also possible that swamp gases are formed over fields, floodplains, fields, and meadows, which can also appear as luminous formations, where no swamp can be seen at first glance, but where one or more swamp bubbles exist somewhere underground, allowing the gas to escape upwards into the open air. Another possibility of light phenomena is based on visible and moving, luminous spherical or disc-shaped electromagnetic light formations, which are very small but can also reach a size of more than 1 meter. These luminous structures rise to a height of 1 or 2 meters, float around in irregular orbits only to collapse and dissolve again, or rise high into the air and disappear. The whole thing can be compared to ball lightning, as you know it from personal experience. Other things concerning light phenomena and unknown flying objects around the worldwide crop circles are the result of Earth humans and private pranks on the one hand, but also of military and espionage research achievements on the other hand. This is especially true in England, which is considered the mother of crop circles in crop circle expert circles, and where the main centers of crop circles are surrounded. What to say about the remaining percentages? Unfortunately, I am against our directives, which I have to follow because I cannot talk about them.
Dear, thanks for your explanations, for which I think it was also necessary to redefine the extraterrestrial influences, that is to say the cosmic universal oscillations, whereby the earthlings are stimulated to the artistic crop circle works. Everything else I have said should also be of interest to many who are genuinely interested in everything and do not allow themselves to be turned into fantasy-filled believers by sectarian unreality. There is, however, one mystery that has not yet been solved, and that is how the angled, altered, and sometimes burst or exploded growth nodes of cereal stalks come about. Can you explain something about this?
This also has a very simple cause, which is based on the electromagnetic radiation, which creates a tension, and thus the knot housing is torn open or bursts open, as you say. Exploding cannot be said about this because the electromagnetic effect does not produce heat, but only tension, which causes the growth nodes to rupture.
This is exactly what Svath, your father, already explained to me. He also explained to me that it is the growth nodes, which are only supposed to grow on cold nights, that give the stem its stability. From this I concluded that the more nodes a culm has, the more stable it has to be. And if I remember correctly, the knots do not appear every few centimeters, but nevertheless, depending on the coolness of the nights, at visibly short intervals. And the more growth nodes a culm has, the more stable it is. He also let me look at such growth nodes with a super microscope when I was allowed to look at different grain circles with him as early as the 1940s. It was obvious that the growth nodes of the affected grains showed anomalies, but these were not caused by heat, as Svath explained, but by electromagnetic tension. The growth nodes of cereals and grasses, etc., are the part of the plant that acts as a joint, and is so Strong that when the stalks are bent or pressed down by wind and storm, etc., they can be repositioned on it. The growth nodes are the area from which the plant grows, and which therefore also has a special elasticity. And the fact that the so-called crop circle researchers have suspected for a long time that strong heating causes the growth nodes to burst open is of course pure nonsense, because your father Svath has on the one hand explained that there is no heat effect, but only a very strong electromagnetism, and on the other hand he has also shown me experimentally that growth nodes in cereals do indeed burst open due to electromagnetic influence. Svath explained that when heated, the inside of the plant would expand, causing the cells to burst, but that this was not effectively the case, because electromagnetism in this form is a cold process and therefore also acts cold, which is also the reason why the growth nodes and stalks would retain their special elasticity and altered shape, which could not be the case if the whole thing was caused by heat radiation. I think I'm allowed to say all this, because the silence only lasted until the end of 2016.
That you can keep your silence, that was never a question.
Sometimes it's hard, but if you're always careful, there is also no problem. Here and there you also have to act stupid or ignorant, but I avoid doing that by lying.
This is no secret to me. And besides, I know that you understand perfectly well how to always find ways to talk around an open truth when necessity demands it, to keep the silence to which you are obliged. Even if you are often considered stupid for this reason, which obviously does not bother you, you know how to keep your silence.
This is too much praise, Ptah, because your father Svath deserves it because he taught me the value of silence.
This is interesting, of course, and I know it. And now I cannot help but express my respect for you and tell you what thoughts and feelings keep moving me. The whole of what you have learned and done in your life is part of what has shaped the picture of your life. Because through your silence you have learned to be always true to the truth, even if you had to talk around it without falling for a lie. If I may compare you to a cornstalk, I would like to say that the cool nights when the pliable growth nodes grow up are like the hard times you have lived through, and which you often did not like, but you have overcome them anyway. This is how your knowledge, your behavior, and all the values of your life came into being. And the more crises you have gone through, the more knots have appeared in all your behavior, in your steadfastness, your endurance, in all your actions and activities, and the more stable, sustainable, successful, and truthful, you have become a mature human being who can bear the full responsibility of his difficult mission. And if even now and in the future a great storm comes, sometimes a great storm, then you can bend, because you are strong and you go forward and you will stand firm even in the storm wind, just as a spike cannot bend because of its many strong growth nodes. And the fact is that I have always known that whenever cold nights and times came and will come in your life, you always thought and will continue to think that they had and have a purpose and that you gratefully used, and continue to use them to keep yourself afloat and to mature your mission and to pass it on as a sound and stable teaching to Earth humans that it will bear ripe fruit one day. Even if on a larger scale it will only be in the further future. And I say this because I know it, and because I am aware that you trust in your work, and know that it will bring benefits to Earth humans for all the difficult times to come. This will be so, even if in the future, as in the beginning in the first 3 decades of your mission, it was very difficult and in some cases has continued until today, which the uninitiated can hardly or not at all measure. Only what has happened to this day, through the antagonism of many adversaries, as well as through disloyal members as a result of betrayal of the mission and of you, would have led another human beings to lose courage and to give up everything, while you unswervingly fulfilled your duty and kept your word of promise.
Ptah, please.
My words are serious, dear friend.
I'm sorry, Ptah, but your words, I think they're a bit much.
You do not have to comment on that because it is only the truth.
All right, you obviously mean what you say, so I will not say anything else and I will not growl either. It is just...
Please.
All right then, nothing more.
It had to be said once and for all against all the lies and slander on the part of your adversaries.
All right, then everything is said, I think. Which is why I want to talk about something else and ask you what your father Svath once mentioned in the 1940s. He spoke at that time of a drug that was given to all Nazi soldiers and also to all the Allies, through which they became brutal, boisterous, euphoric, murderous, and unscrupulous, and became effective despisers of humanity, killers, robots of torture, rape, and murder. Svath called the drug horror drug and gravedigger drug, which was actually intended as a drug for depression and for calming nerves and the mind, and was called Pervitin or something similar, and was banned in the 1980s. Can you say something more about it?
Yes. The methamphetamine Pervitin was a well-known stimulant drug similar to the body's own adrenaline, which was also declared as a wake-up drug in the Nazi army and which was the real precursor of the heavy hallucinatory drug crystal meth. The addictive Pervitin was administered to the soldiers of the Nazi Reich during the last World War as a stimulant and as a drug for brutality and recklessness, to make infantrymen, sailors, and pilots braver and unscrupulous, as well as to enable them to perform supernatural feats. The remedy was addictive and required that more and more of it had to be added to the body to achieve the desired effect. This resulted in psychological and other health damage, as well as numerous deaths from excessive use. From 1944 onwards, another drug became topical in the Nazi army, the so-called pill D-Inx, which consisted of 5 milligrams of Eucadol, also 5 milligrams of cocaine, and 3 milligrams of Pervitin. As in the Nazi Wehrmacht, the Allies and their forces did the same for 3 years, with the drug, invented and produced in Germany in 1938, also being smuggled to the U.S. Americans by profit-obsessed merchants, and later, from 1939 on, when it was introduced into the Nazi Wehrmacht as an unrestrained drug also by traitors. This is how it came about that the U.S. military powers of the time also had their hands in the drug and supplied their armed forces with this drug, as well as with opiates which were considered drugs. This, whereas the English, French, and Canadians were not directly and therefore only in isolated cases affected by it. However, these facts, which were revealed to the Allies by the U.S. military forces, are still kept quiet and denied by the U.S.
To deny facts about crimes and dirty murders and other facts, etc. To trivialize everything is the custom of most politicians, military and secret services and all their supporters around the world. As I also learned when I was in Israel without permission and met 2 former Nazi henchmen who were able to live in Israel scot-free and work for the state service. But according to certain people, such facts, underhandedness, and criminal behavior should not be mentioned. Nor should expressions like idiots, stupid, dumb, brain amputees, etc. be used for people for whom, if the truth is to be told, no other names can be used. This is stupidly mocked by certain human beings because they think that such expressions should not be put in the mouth and should not be used in public because of decency and good behavior. But I do not share this view, because the truth can only be clarified with words of truth, which also include such honor and dignity-deprecating terms and designations, because only these express what has to be said, explained, and made understandable. Slimy words and terms do not help to clarify and explain the truth, and therefore do not bring any success. But this cannot be understood by human beings who mean themselves better than their fellow human beings, but who also believe that, as a result of their education, they are more predestined to be able to judge which choice of words and manner of speaking as well as designations, especially those that are elevated according to their meaning, should or may be used for people whose catastrophic mistakes and behavior must be pointed out. For my part, I have had the experience, and have also had it time and again, that slimy words and designations, which should be used instead of harsh words of truth, do not stimulate the human beings to think and reflect. On the contrary, this happens when hard words are used to explain the truth, which human beings usually do not dare to utter, because they feel addressed and set their world of thoughts in motion. But human beings who think they are better off with slimy, dishonest and socially acceptable untruth words and soft terms for people who are disastrously misbehaving and irresponsibly harming their fellow human beings and the people, be they sectarians, politicians, military men, presidents, as well as people who hold doctorates, etc. Such slime talkers are cowardly sneaks on the one hand, and dishonest on the other, and further promote untruth.
What you say I can understand very well because it is really the way you say it. Furthermore, it has to be said that if the human beings are not open and honest and therefore not even with hard words, whatever they may be, and also do not dare to express their clear opinion about reality and its truth, then this has nothing to do with a good colloquial mother tongue note, nursery. On the contrary, such action and behavior is, as you say, cowardice, but also the fact that the human beings do not understand the effective facts of life and all its aspects, and are therefore uneducated in terms of life behavior. Moreover, as a rule, such human beings are so taken up with themselves and with their wrong actions and their similar and sneaky behavior, as you well called it, that they cannot distinguish the wrong from the correct, which clearly indicates an intelligent disadvantage. Arrogance towards other human beings, especially those who use hard words of truth to say what corresponds to reality, and who also use hard terms with regard to human beings, is part of the usual false behavior of those who object to words of truth, because they imagine themselves to be more value-laden and are also hateful, servant, and cowardly. But these are the human beings who are alienated from life, who worship and indulge in idols and who believe that they are more alert, more capable of thinking, more educated, more knowledgeable, more sophisticated, more accomplished and superior, etc., in relation to their fellow human beings, which they are in no way.
You said that well, and you hit the nail on the head. But what I said before was a little too much, because I actually wanted to talk about something that you told me, just like your father Schwath talked about it in the 1940s, and which we've discussed in private on several occasions. I am referring to the fact that the criminal and even criminal machinations carried out in nature by the rampant overpopulation not only have a very strong impact on the climate, but also the atmosphere. And therefore also the air in which oxygen is embedded is used by many life forms, but not all, as breathing air, and only by oxygenium breathers, as Schwath called the oxygen-breathing life forms. The majority in this respect are the human beings, but also animals, creatures, reptiles, birds, fish and amphibians, etc., as well as trees, shrubs, and other plants of all kinds need it to breathe. Although the scientists responsible for this do not talk about it, perhaps because they have not yet discovered it, and therefore do not know anything about it, or because they are irresponsibly silent about it, according to your explanations, which you have so far only given privately, the breathable air in relation to the oxygen content for all those life forms has already decreased by about 40% in the last 70 years. This has been happening since overpopulation has drastically begun to rampage and has been and continues to be carried out by these self-destructive machinations of every conceivable kind in nature and on the planet itself, which have already led to irreparable destruction and even to the extermination of animals, creatures, and many plants, etc., as well as to climate change. The whole of nature and its fauna and flora, and even the human beings of the earth and even the planet itself, are already undergoing negative changes which will ultimately have serious consequences. Even if the nature-destroying criminal machinations by the overpopulation would quickly stop, the ongoing process of destruction and devastation would not be stopped in such a way that it would not continue. An immediate stop to the destruction and devastation of the environment by the irresponsible machinations resulting from overpopulation could only slow down the whole process of destruction for a very long time. But it would not regenerate everything. To regenerate everything that has been destroyed and devastated would require very, very long periods of time, but much of what has been destroyed would be irrevocably lost. This, such as the predatory and criminal exploitation of the sands of streams, rivers, lakes, and seashores to produce building materials for houses and many other structures, which are becoming more and more necessary due to the ever-growing overpopulation. This destroys the beaches of all bodies of water, which in turn leads to flooding, while fertile arable, field and garden land, as well as alluvial and mountainous areas, are irretrievably concreted over, obstructed and destroyed by the many residential buildings, as well as factories, power stations and other energy production plants of all kinds, as well as roads, streets, airports and amusement parks, etc. But this is only part of the crime, because the decomposition of sand in streams, rivers, lakes and seas, especially the decomposition of sand on the beaches, also has the consequence that the phytoplankton or the vegetable plankton is destroyed and also robbed of its habitat, about which you can perhaps explain something when I have finished everything I want to say now. That would be good, because I know that the disappearance of the phytoplankton would reduce the oxygen content on the planet to such an extent that all living beings would have to suffocate, for which the beginning is already set in the first origin by the destructive and degenerated machinations of overpopulation. And the whole thing is progressing more and more. Consequently, the free living space for mankind and for the existence of nature and its fauna and flora is becoming less and less, which is further encouraged by the stupidity of the irresponsible rulers. And this promotion is also happening irresponsibly, with more and more roads and tunnels being built which, after a considerable period of time, are inevitably overloaded and incapable of coping with the volume of traffic that is growing in relation to the growing overpopulation. So those foolhardy, brazen, and morbidly stupid rulers, who can neither think clearly and rationally nor perceive the effective facts, order that new roads and tunnels for road and rail traffic be built again and again. The same is happening with the construction of dwellings. Factories, amusement parks, airports, sports facilities, and everything else imaginable that affects nature, its fauna and flora, and all existing life in general. In addition to this, many irresponsible statesmen or rulers, politicians, their lobbyists and henchmen, etc., who cooperate in governmental activities, are engaged in criminal business, such as the supply of war weapons to other countries, especially in crisis areas, which also keeps the weapons industry going and can lead to new wars, hatred, and strife, and cause many peoples to suffer hardship, misery, death, and destruction. And in order to achieve this, certain war-obsessed states and state powers are engaged in all sorts of evil machinations, and all levers are set in motion. A fact, as it is done, for example, by the Russian-hating and world domination-addicted criminal elements of the USA, who were also able to repolish their former good president, Barack Obama, on their dirty policies and their crime machinations, and to degrade him to a puppet, because he was too naive and too weak to carry out his office of right-wingers according to his intended meaning. As a result, during his presidential years, he became a traitor to his own affirmations, promises, opinions, promises, commitments, vows, and promises of honor. A fact which unfortunately only became apparent during the years of his presidency, when it became clear that he was not capable of his office, but was at the mercy of the wrong advisors and the background government. First, he was a very good man who could have done a lot of good for the U.S. in terms of a peace-oriented U.S. policy, to stop its criminal global machinations, as well as to get the war-loving majority of the U.S. administration and the U.S. population in the mood for reconciliation with Russia. At first, everything looked good, but the more he drifted away from himself and his ideals, the more he fell prey to the same evils that have marked all U.S. powers since the U.S. presidencies were in place. Over the years and during his presidency, he changed from the first righteous president, who had wanted to and could have done a lot for the U.S. and the U.S. people and for world peace, to the influenced, unrighteous word breaker of his promises and to the enemy of Russia. In this way, he has now also listened to the propaganda of the anti-Russian people who wanted Hillary Rodham Clinton at the helm and claimed that the Russians influenced the election. And since Obama is a Clinton supporter, he was easily influenced by the Russian hacker story. So he also, of course, through his advisors and those who conducted and manipulated him in other ways, announced the expulsion of Russian diplomats, etc. Russian President Putin reacted to this in such a way that he did not allow himself to be provoked, did not take counter-sanctions, and despite everything, took peaceful steps. This, in turn, is now being so slanderously reinterpreted by all the anti-Russian people in the US and in the EU dictatorship, unfortunately also in Switzerland, by certain brain amputees and by clueless idiotic politicians, journalists, commentators, and private individuals, that Putin's actions are dishonest and are merely designed to sneak into US politics and into the US people and to make them look like good men. And that is what the majority of the stupid US population claims, from which, of course, as usual, all the righteous human beings in the US are excluded, and the politicians or the US Republicans and US Democrats, as well as the EU dictatorship and also certain anti-Russian elements in Switzerland and other countries who are to be taken in the same spirit. This is because on the one hand they are too stupid, too irrational and incapable of clear thinking, and on the other hand because their intelligence is not sufficient to perceive the effective facts and to judge them correctly. Nonetheless, it is to be hoped that the newly elected US President Trump will at least keep some of his serious election promises and will assert himself, fulfill them, and implement peaceful relations with Russia. It is also to be hoped that the US will no longer interfere in the affairs of foreign states in terms of intelligence, politics, and military affairs, that it will no longer overthrow the governments of other countries, that it will no longer create order in its own country, and that it will do good. Of course, Trump, as I said, is not the yellow of the egg either, and therefore also dubious in his actions. But after all, he is the lesser evil compared to Hillary Clinton, who is false and devious and hostile to Russia and wanted to let a war break out. What good Trump will do now is of course also questionable and is written in the stars because he too has crazy ambitions and is a power man. But if he is really able to create good relations between the USA and Russia, if he manages to get the USA to end its wars all over the world, and if the US Secret Services no longer rush the world into acts of war through infamous machinations, then much has already been won. And if Trump should also manage to build up a clean US America, that would also be desirable. It is also a fact, however, that Europe may still be in danger from Russia in the future if the US and EU dictatorships continue to rant, rush, impose sanctions and use terror against this state, which could well lead to Russia's patience being torn out of joint and strike at it with force of arms, as an old prophecy from Svath says. So there is nothing left to do but wait and see what the Trump future brings, although certainly not too much of a good thing, because one way or another US America will remain US America. Trump may be the lesser of two evils compared to Clinton, who is false and sneaky and anti-Russian and wanted to start a war. But Trump is also US American, and should therefore be treated with caution. Trump is not the yellow of the egg either, and what good he will do is also questionable, because he too has crazy impulses. But if, as I have already mentioned in another way, he can actually bring about peaceful and politically satisfactory relations between the USA and Russia, if he can actually bring about an end to the irresponsible warfare and war-inciting intelligence activities of the USA all over the world, and if the US Secret Services can also stop interfering in the affairs of foreign countries with disgraceful machinations, then that would be an enormous gain. So there is no choice but to wait and see what the Trump future brings. But since Trump is not the absolute winner either, everything or at least a lot can go wrong with him, so we should not put too much hope in him. This is quite apart from the fact that under certain circumstances he may succeed in really creating the beginnings of an understanding with Russia, which could lead to the first vague steps towards world peace, as the old prophecy goes that the great world peace will one day come from Russia. But if he allows himself to be remodeled and terroristically manipulated like Obama by his advisors and presidential minions, etc., not much good could also be expected. The fact is, however, that the Russia-hating like blind chickens and as judgmentless and self-involved idiots. They run after all liars and slanderers, who rise up high-handedly above others and mock and defile them with defamation, misjudgment, lies, and slander in order to put themselves in the spotlight. But it is the same in the EU dictatorship, and at its decisive head is German Chancellor Merkel, who, on the one hand, as you have analyzed with her, is mentally ill and therefore not powerful in a clear sense, and on the other hand, is also Holocaust vengeful and underhandedly doing everything to defame Russia, to step into the dirt and to attack if possible even by force of arms. At the very least, however, it wants to destroy Germany, which is why it has also created a welcome culture for millions of refugees from underdeveloped third world countries and war zones. But neither do her stupid supporters see all this, nor do the politicians who flock around her, who, in their delusion of power as a result of her Merkel adoration, fail to see a single true political problem for all the problems they are unable to solve because they are self-obsessed, selfish, autocratic, and incapable of recognizing the effective truth that is emerging around them and around the world. So they do not see the Chancellor's sick state of consciousness, just as the great psychologists and psychiatrists do not see it either. As a result, tens of thousands of completely dehumanized Islamist state killers have been able to sneak in as assassins and sleepers in Germany and throughout Europe, as well as rapists of women and girls, thieves, burglars, robbers, murderers, and cheats who the security forces are already unable to control. But even this is not enough, because those who are incapable of power in the world, those who are obsessed with power, those who are in power, those who act over the heads of the people in their greed for power, are pushing it even further, especially the irresponsible lust for power of the USA, the EU dictatorship. But for some time now also the new Turkish dictator Erdogan, and around the world also the creatures of state power of various other countries, because they all cry out for war, hatred, and discord. But war, hatred, and strife are never an answer to the desire for peace, freedom, and security of earthly humanity. It is undeniably the case that peace, freedom, love, and security for life and limb are the highest goods for the human beings of the earth, which they may obtain and also expect in their lives as the common property of mankind. Peace, freedom, love, and security for life and limb are the most valuable things in existence. But how little have the human beings of the earth recognized this? For they have in truth not known since time immemorial how precious these goods are. Until today they have not understood that peace, freedom, love, and security for life and limb are the basis and the guarantee for all happiness. Unfortunately, the fact is that they are unable to interpret and understand these values, so they also do not know how to give them to others. If the human beings love peace, freedom, love, and security for life and limb, then they do not simply accept everything passively, because it is precisely by being purely passive that they allow themselves to be undermined by discord, lack of love and insecurity, which is why they allow themselves to be paralyzed by fear and lose peace, freedom, and love. This often leads to the destruction of the family and even of life. If the human beings love peace, freedom, and love, and security of life and limb, they will not allow themselves to be subdued by another human being, not even by power-obsessed governmental and official powers, etc., nor by their henchmen or by laws of terror. Peace, freedom, love, and security of life and limb are, in contrast, something completely different from hatred and war. If this were not the case, slavery would still prevail today, and the enslaving religious and sectarian beliefs would also be as coercive today as in medieval times. But even then, when even today there is not yet worldwide peace, freedom, love, and security for life and limb, the best in the human beings of the earth is rebelling against this. When his clear and profound thoughts and feelings tell him that peace without love and security for life and limb is no peace, no love, and no security. In this way, the whole thing is only a cemetery peace, and such a peace, such a freedom, and such a love, and such a security could not even have been meant by former slaves, or even today, when they dreamed in their misery and in their misery of real peace. of freedom, love, and security for life and limb. Peace is freedom and security. These values mean that the human beings are free from fear, anxiety, and coercion. But peace, freedom, and security also mean for all peoples of all earthly humanity to be free from exploitation, torture, slavery, crime, persecution, rape, violence, and the death penalty. Peace, freedom, love, and security are the foundations of every humane existence. Peace, freedom, and security must also exist within the human being. In the family, in relation to one's neighbor, fellow human beings, society, and all peoples. This is the basis of happiness for every human being. Peace, freedom, love, and security are the foundations of true human being, of progress and coexistence. And without these high values, there can be no advancement of the individual human being, no advancement of the peoples, and also no happiness and thoughtful rest for all the earth humans. Peace, freedom, love, and security are not possible for the individual human beings without these inestimably high values, also being accorded to the whole human community in which the individual is embedded. The fact cannot be overturned that the individual human beings are a member of the whole of humanity, that they participate in its destiny and are inseparably and inextricably linked to its destiny and also to all life of nature and its fauna and flora. The state of peace, freedom, love, and security for each individual human being, for each people, for all humanity, and for each life form in the wild and in its fauna and flora is not possible if the entire earthly human community does not work to achieve this state. It is by no means enough simply to read, write, or talk about it, but everything must be thoroughly considered and thought through before it can also be put into practice. To read, write, or speak only fine words does not in any way bring any success, for only the comprehension of a thing leads to its flourishing and to a valuable new achievement and a consistent effect. The 3 world wars of 1756, 2 1763, 1914, 2 1918 and 1939, 2 1945, and the bloody and destructive history of the last 7 decades have shown until today that Earth humans, as they have done since ancient times, have learned nothing in terms of the precious good of peace, freedom, love, and security for life and limb, not to mention the preservation of human achievements which are maliciously, wantonly, and destroyed by wars, revolutions, and terrorism. Earthly humanity has never since ancient times been punished by an imaginary creator god for discord, bondage, lack of love, and insecurity, for such a one has never existed and never will. But if, nevertheless, deities have repeatedly appeared who have wrought havoc on the earth and among earth humans, it has been power-hungry earthlings, degenerate human bastards who have brought death, ruin, and destruction and had millions and millions of human beings murdered. They have always done this not personally, but through their vassals, who fought the wars as soldiers and military men, as secret services, terrorists, and murderous mercenaries. Earth humans have thus always punished themselves terribly when they committed the breach of peace, freedom, love, and security for life and limb. As a result, the human beings of the earth have always lost almost everything they possessed since time immemorial, even at the time of the first deadly battles of the primitive humans. Belongings, caves, and later house, farm and country, the family, the neighbors and fellow men, respect and prestige, but also their peace, freedom, love, and security, if not least also their lives. Since time immemorial, the human beings of Earth have forgotten or never even thought of the fact that all the members of a family, a community, a people, and even the entire Earth humans are inseparably connected. So it has also never been realized that a human being can never simply separate his destiny from the destiny of his people and from the whole of humanity. For his own destiny begins when he is begotten by a father from the masses of humanity and born of a mother, after which he must continue his own destiny, but cannot live and exist without his fellow human beings and their destiny. So he cannot separate his peace, freedom, and love, his security and happiness from the destiny of his people and humanity. The fact is, unfortunately, that since time immemorial, And therefore, not only in our days, peace, freedom, love, and security have been threatened in every respect, and continue to be threatened as well as deeply endangered. And effectively, peace, freedom, love, and security in every respect are still threatened today, and even more than in all those past barbaric times, which are believed to have been overcome by Earth humans long ago. Even today, only the dictatorial and malicious power of those in power is still valid. And this is completely contrary to the preaching of democracy, which only exists in name, because in reality it is not the people, but the people in power who decide. Only in a few small states of the earth are there any real beginnings of democracy, such as Switzerland, where a semi-democracy exists. The whole of humanity on earth can serve the cause of peace, freedom, and security only if it is of good will as a whole to unite for common protection in a peaceful, free, and secure manner. This must not be done in a petty, unworthy manner, devoid of all inner greatness, but rather with honor, goodness, tolerance, understanding, and dignity. The effective and malicious danger that emanates from every discord, every lack of freedom and insecurity must also finally be recognized, so that no false party political posturing or power-hungry game can be played. In the struggle for peace, freedom, and security there must also be no fear or cowardice, nor subservience, just as a peace-free security process must not be hindered or destroyed by lust for power and unilateral demands for advantage, etc. If support for undignified action in the pursuit of peace, freedom, and security is given in a non-dignified manner, then this is beyond all measure as to the authenticity of such negotiations. For any undignified action in this way would be an abuse of the law, the sublime and great task of which must be to create, protect, and preserve peace, freedom, and security in an honest manner. The aspiration of the individual human beings of the earth and of all humanity on earth for peace, freedom, love, and security must be carried out in full justice, and it must be fulfilled by the human beings being genuinely honest and of good will. This goodwill has been lost by an immense number of the human beings of the earth since time immemorial. It has simply been forgotten or has fallen asleep in them, so it must be rebuilt, recalled, or awakened in them anew. In this way, it must be achieved that the human being wakes up or becomes aware of this fact again, that everything arrives in his consciousness and that he puts it into practice. Because peace, freedom and love and security for life and limb, for the protection of all achievements, for all existence and all values of life, for nature, its fauna and flora, as well as for the climate and the planet itself, require the will and the implementation of the good of the individual human being and the entire Earth humans. Every single human being on Earth must play a decisive role in this process, so that his and the Earth's population's fear and anxiety of discord, lack of freedom, lack of love and insecurity in every respect will dwindle, and the entire Earth's population will at last enjoy true peace, true freedom and love, and effective security in every good relationship. The human beings of the Earth must consciously summon up the will to first create peace, freedom, love, and security in themselves, because only through this is it also included that the whole thing also begins to have an effect in their actions and in their behavior. Because only then, when they are willing to do so and implement everything in themselves in the best and good way, can it really succeed. And if all the human beings on Earth seriously want this, they can also be ready to change to peaceful, liberal, loving, and safety-oriented thinking, acting, and behavior. If the human beings sincerely want this, then they must also be prepared to act and to make sacrifices of all the discord, lack of freedom, dissatisfaction, lack of love, and insecurity of all kinds that reside within them. But the human beings who read and write good things, or only talk and criticize, but are not prepared to act first and foremost on themselves and to change everything for the better and good, have no will to do so and cannot understand or implement anything. To hesitate and dither, to see only the negative and not the positive, means in any case not wanting. It is clear that with everything that has now been said, something very serious has been addressed, But this had to be done because it is the duty to inform the human beings of the Earth about the effective reality and its truth. Precisely what is important and what has to be done for every people and for the whole of humanity. And also because everything applies not only to the people of yesterday and the day before yesterday, but also to the present and future generations, and therefore also to the children and grandchildren. It had to be, and must continue to be spoken seriously for the sake of peace, freedom and love, and for the sake of security for life and limb and all human spheres, all of which affects not only the peoples of Europe, but of the whole world. Peace, freedom, love, and security in all respects are very serious matters, and they are of particular importance and need, especially in the present time and in the future. This is, among many other things, the important message to be given to the human beings of the Earth today. But this message also contains the very serious admonition for the Earth humans to be for the creation of peace. Freedom, love, and security for body, life, and also in any other good and positive relationship of goodwill. This also includes stopping the rampant overpopulation, which is bringing irreparable disaster and destruction to mankind, because otherwise it's degenerated and further on speculative machinations on nature. Its fauna and flora, as well as on the atmosphere and air and on the climate and the planet, will bring about its irreparable downfall.
I would like to say something else about the phytoplankton you mentioned, namely that this is also called photoautotrophic plankton or vegetable plankton, and it also represents organisms that drift with the current in the water, whereby they have in common that they cannot move against the current. Plankton generally serves as food for aquatic life, such as the blue whales. It consists mainly of cyanobacteria, dinoflagellates, diatoms, golden algae, and green algae. Phytoplankton grows in the surface waters of the oceans and other waters, drifting with the water currents. They are extremely dependent on sunlight, carbon dioxide, or CO2, and on water, because only then can they produce phytoplankton as organic material through the process of photosynthesis. They feed on it and use it to build up their cells, but waste products are also produced, one of which is the oxygen that all life forms use through their respiration. This is the most important thing.
But with regard to the process of photosynthesis, I learned from Svath that oxygen photosynthesis is basically the oldest, most important, and significant biogeochemical process on Earth, which ultimately also produces oxygen as a waste product. However, the formation of the so-called disoxygen is important in this process, which in turn is only created through the presence of atomic oxygen. It is therefore not correct to assume that oxygen only results from the photosynthesis process in trees and all plants, as is unfortunately assumed as a result of incorrect or insufficient school instruction and general education. Photosynthesis, through the formation of organic substances by means of light or solar energy, directly and indirectly drives almost all existing ecosystems, providing all other life forms with energy-rich building materials and, above all, also vital energy. Oxygen, a waste product of photosynthesis, which is useful to most living beings for energy production, with cellular respiration acting as an oxidant, was also very important in the early days of oxygen, namely that higher life forms could develop as a result of oxygen photosynthesis. But oxygen is also very important in other ways, such as in relation to ozone, which is called O3 and from which the protective ozone layer is formed, which was very badly damaged by the human beings on Earth during the last century with CFCs and almost led to their collapse because the CFC gases, which you call bromine gases, destroyed the ozone. The formation of the element oxygen, which has the sign O2, only made life possible when it entered the atmosphere, which, as your father Svath explained to me, required atomic oxygen for its formation, or oxygen in the form of free, individual oxygen atoms, which are only stable under extreme conditions, such as the vacuum of the universe, or in hot solar atmospheres. Elementary oxygen occurs predominantly in the form of a compound of two oxygen atoms as molecular oxygen or dioxygen or disoxygen. Oxygen is a colorless and odorless gas, which is contained in the air to about 21%, along with other gases, but I cannot list them all, which you might be able to do. Oxygen is also necessary for a fire to burn at all, or to operate internal combustion engines or combustion processes. Oxygen is also involved in aging and corroding of things. Therefore, for example, rusting of iron or fogging of copper and silver, etc., as well as age changes of all kinds of materials, and the whole flora can only be caused by the element oxygen. As already mentioned, nearly all living beings need oxygen to breathe and live, but when breathing out, oxygen is released as carbon dioxide or CO2. Plants, on the other hand, generally reject more oxygen than they consume as a result of the photosynthesis process, which they usually remove from the air by breathing or by absorption as dissolved oxygen from water. As a gas, which it is, oxygen is toxic to most life forms in high concentrations.
This is all correct, what you say, and apparently I have to go into more detail about everything in your opinion. Then there is this. It is absolutely correct that oxygen photosynthesis is one of the oldest and most important biogeochemical processes on the planet. Photosynthesis corresponds to the process of producing energy-rich biomolecules from energy-poor materials using light or solar energy. In fact, through the formation of organic substances by means of solar energy, it directly and indirectly drives almost all existing ecosystems, whereby other life forms also receive energy-rich building materials and the necessary amounts of energy. Of course, you are also right about this, what you said about oxygen being used by other life forms for energy production, etc., as well as the fact that the ozone layer is built up of oxygen. Photosynthesis is carried out by algae, many different plants, and by certain bacteria. In this biochemical process, light energy is first converted into chemical energy by light-absorbing dyes, such as bacteriochlorophyll and chlorophyll. Then, among other things, organic compounds, mostly carbohydrates, are used to build up energy-rich. Organic compounds, mostly carbohydrates, from inorganic and low-energy substances, that is to say CO2 or carbon dioxide, and mostly H2O or water. This synthesis is called assimilation because the energy-rich organic substances become components of the life forms. However, a distinction is made between oxygen and anoxygen photosynthesis, whereby the oxygen produces molecular oxygen, while the anoxygen does not. However, other inorganic substances can be produced instead of oxygen, such as elementary sulfur. As already explained, and I have to explain repeatedly, oxygen photosynthesis is the oldest and most important biogeochemical process on Earth. And through the formation of organic substances by means of solar energy, it directly and indirectly drives almost all existing ecosystems and provides other living beings with energy-rich building materials and energy. Phytoplankton, as primary producer, builds up its biomass or body substance with the help of the photosynthesis process from solar energy, carbon dioxide, and nutrients as primary production. Phytoplankton drifting in stagnant and slowly flowing waters is basically the basis of the autochthonous food pyramid. It is used as food by zooplankton as well as by many aquatic organisms that live at the bottom of inland waters and seas. These planktonic life forms, which can be so-called, have developed amazing net-like structures that enable them to filter the plankton out of the water, the most remarkable of all direct food chains being phytoplankton. And if oxygen is calculated as a percentage of the phytoplankton waste produced on Earth, we have records that show an average current level of 70% of the total Earth's oxygen production, which means that only about 30% of the total Earth's oxygen comes from forests and plants of all surface species. It should also be mentioned that according to our records and calculations, since the end of the Third World War in 1945, the total oxygen content of the earthly atmosphere, or air, has fallen by 0.416%, which is already causing breathing difficulties for many life forms, also for many Earth humans. If, however, this oxygen continues to decrease as the phytoplankton dwindles, then all respiration-dependent life on Earth will suffocate. And this can happen if the other 30% that produces oxygen, such as the trees, rainforests, and other oxygen-supplying forests and plants, etc., also die. If we consider the phytoplankton of the oceans and all inland waters, it consumes about as much CO2 as all land plants on all continents. This is also the reason why good climate regulation plays a very important role. If we consider the oxygen content of the atmosphere or air, it is not constant but fluctuates, albeit only slightly, which is due to the fact that the oceans, with their algae in the northern and southern hemispheres of the Earth, have approximately the same proportion. On the other hand, the seasonal proportion of forests and other green plants is roughly the same in the northern and southern hemispheres. However, it is worth noting that the forests in the northern hemisphere are leafless in winter, while those in the southern hemisphere remain green throughout the year. For this reason, the oxygen content in the northern areas increases somewhat when spring starts in the northern hemisphere for the leafy forests, the forest tundra, and the taiga.
So the important explanation in connection with phytoplankton is the oxygen production. But can you please give me the composition data of the atmospheric air, because I am not familiar with the exact composition.
The composition of atmospheric air consists of the noble gases argon, helium, neon, krypton, and xenon, as well as carbon dioxide, methane, hydrogen, nitrous oxide, laughing gas, and carbon monoxide, in addition to the main gases oxygen and nitrogen. What proportions of these substances are present in the air and which are to be listed as volume fractions of all substances mentioned? I can, of course, name them. If you were to list them as a table when recalling our conversation, everything would be clear. When naming the characters, you must also pay attention to the high and low numbers. It is important to explain that I list the gas contents from the highest to the lowest value, as well as that the oxygen makes up 20.995% of the total volume. The whole data to be mentioned are now as follows. Main component symbol volume percentage nitrogen N 278.08, oxygen O 220.995, carbon dioxide CO 20.04. Argon R 0.93, neon Ni 0.0018, helium He 0.0005, methane CH 40.00018, krypton Kr 0.00011, hydrogen H 20.00005, nitrous N2O 0.00003, carbon monoxide CO 0.00002, xenon Xe 0.000009.
Now we have a brief treatise on phytoplankton, the process of photosynthesis, oxygen production, and the composition of the atmospheric air.
You can say that, yes.
Well, thanks for all your explanations, which actually brings me back to questions about Wi-Fi, which Njana told you about so that you can decide.
In this respect, we have found that everything that is done privately and also used in this way must remain a private matter. So if the Wi-Fi network is used privately, then all users have to be financially responsible for this privately, as well as for telephone connections, telephone calls, and radio and TV fees.
So it is clear. It really cannot be any different, because the private sphere must remain private, in every respect. But what I also want to ask is this. You already said some time ago that Zafanat Paniach and Yanarara will come here to clarify some things regarding the strange incidents that keep happening and that you cannot explain yourself, despite all your efforts to clarify them. It is simply annoying what happens over and over again, especially since I have been working with the computer since 2001, and I have been harmed over and over again, along with all the other strange things that happen over and over again. Talking about this openly is not exactly advisable, because otherwise we will be called crazy, because the whole of all the strange and unbelievable occurrences cannot be explained in a reasonable way. But the two of them, Yanarara and Zafenat have not yet made themselves heard, so I would be interested to know when they are coming.
Both of them have already been working every few days for about a month in the entire center area, although of course they cannot be observed due to their shielding. And what all has been revealed so far is that with absolute certainty, no earthly jamming transmitters or similar devices have been installed anywhere, as was unfortunately the case elsewhere when you lived at Weihaldenstrasse 10 in Hinwil. They were also able to clearly establish that the protective screen shows no signs of foreign influences, so that no attempts were made to penetrate it with the intention of causing damage. So such attacks can also be ruled out with absolute certainty. What is open, however, refers to the energy supply lines to the center, which could be susceptible, just could be, because in this respect everything is also in order, because there is also a safeguard for this. A weak point could also be the internet, but you are not directly connected to it, so this factor does not have to be considered either. But what has now been found elsewhere is a matter that has not yet been satisfactorily clarified, which is why some more time is needed to clarify it. As Yanarara and Zafenat reported, they came across the trace of very unusual, strong energetic vibrations, the origin of which they have not yet been able to fathom, on the one hand, and on the other hand, these energies are able to weaken the protective shield applied and thus penetrate it in a weakened way. And what results from this, and this is already a safe assumption, are clearly the strange occurrences that occur again and again in the center, as well as in connection with your computer.
So we cannot assume the same or a similar thing has happened in Hinwil before?
That is correct, because these very strong energies are a form, which is also unknown to Yanarara, and therefore, of course, also unknown to the Sonians. And the fact that Yanarara was able to register these energies at all was only because she, together with Zafenat, developed completely new apparatus over the years that are able to record these energies. These are unusually strong and have vibrations that have just as negative an effect on the human body as the apparatuses and devices developed by Yanarara are also strangely affected. However, she first has to find out the origin of these vibrations, which she has been working on for more than a month. This, in addition to the fact that she frequently carries out investigations in the center grounds together with Zafenat, which she intends to complete in 2 days, only to concentrate on the study in relation to the energies she has determined. After that, when she has investigated everything and will have come to a result, she wants to come to you together with Zafenat and report how and what can be done or not.
Ah, so Yanarara has been with you for a long time and has been working with Zafenat.
Yes, for more than 16 years now. But last year she was back in her home on Sonara for 4 months, where she visited her family and also spent her holidays.
Is certainly an interesting personality that I like to be surprised by when she comes here with Zafenat.
Interesting, because she said something similar about your personality. And she does not want to miss the opportunity to make your acquaintance.
As usual, I am looking forward to it, also to meeting someone again. Wait, you hear the phone ringing, but now I will just let it ring.
It is unpleasant, and surely it is also not necessary to disturb us in our conversation.
It does not stop, but I am not answering now.
It should finally.
I can also do more than tell you not to interrupt. But now the doorbell does not ring anymore.
Please go and say that you should not be disturbed now.
Okay, here I am again and hope that nobody disturbs anymore. Then you can start again with your explanation, please.
That would be nice. Especially also because now you are supposed to have a private conversation with my daughter Simya-se during the next 30 minutes. As she wishes, you have to come with me because I cannot connect with her from here.
This is a very pleasant and unexpected surprise. Open the gate and we can leave right away.